Hello, my name is Kevin. I have a quick question that I'm pretty sure is Read and Find Out. Who had custody of Nightblood before Dale?
Read and Find Out.
Hey, kick that off the bucket list. Number 2, do you need anyone else to help you read? Maybe a voice? I'm available.
Yeah, were you there at the thing? Beta readers, if we get our beta readers out of...
I mean, for your reading today, as in voices.
Oh, do voices. Are you a voice actor?
Yes.
Wow. No.
I am now. And then 3, I was in a panel with a voice actor, Phil Lamar, and he was working with Gandhi Tartakovsky for Samurai Jack. Have you seen any of those things, and have you considered Gandhi Tartakovsky as an adapter for Your Work or Wheel of Time?
Yeah, I would die to have Gandhi Tartakovsky.
I would also die.
Right?
I'm trying to speak that into existence.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would love it. That would be fantastic. His Clone Wars are the one true Clone Wars, right? They were all actually a lot of the TV shows were very good. Yeah. But I don't have a lot of power over those things, right? The way that the movie business works, you pick some producers that you hope are going to do a good job, and you just kind of have to sign the deal and hope that they will be able to make things move. And that's what we've done. And I do like the producers. I think they do a good job. I think they're respectful of the material. I've liked what they've done in trying to get screenplays that hold true to the soul of the series, but are adapted in a way that is good for them, that's going to work on the screen. But the honest answer is, it is hard, right? It is super hard to get a film made, to get a television show made. And oftentimes it's like which special deal falls into place here and there. But I mean, if they came to me and said, "Yeah, we've got Gandhi Tartakovsky interested," I'd be like, "Okay, which child do I have to sell?"
I mentioned your name to Phil Lamar today. I'm mentioning his name to you today.
Okay, well, great.
And, I also want to mention that you are my 4th favorite living author after Brian Jakes, Robert Jordan, Terry Pratchett, and now you. So,
okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Well, they're all dead. They were my favorite living authors.
Yeah.
Hi. I have 2 questions regarding your Steelheart series. One, what was your inspiration for writing that particular series in that particular, setting?
So you're asking about the setting specifically, New Chicago?
Oh, what was your inspiration?
So my inspiration was, I grew up in Nebraska, and I really liked visiting Chicago. There was something about it that was like, I always saw on television shows and movies, you'd see LA, you'd see New York and things like this. And there was something about the first time I visited Chicago where I'm like, hey, Midwesterners built a city. They talk like me, they act like me, they're goofy like me. They're not quite as New York or LA-ish, they're like a bunch of goofy Midwesterners. I say that with love, Chicagoans. And there was something that immediately kind of clicked and connected with me in Chicago. Something about it, and I'd always wanted to set a story there, so that's where it came from.
And on the other one, in an interview I saw with Garth Stein, the writer of The Art of Racing in the Rain, he depicted a book like pushing a boulder over like a hill, and it does its own thing. Was that your experience when you were writing your books?
No, I tend to be more of an outline writer than I am a discovery writer. A lot of discovery writers will talk about this, that it's, you kind of just control the story barely as it is, and it surprises you and things like that. There are definitely surprises. There are definitely things that you come up with while you're writing, but I work from an outline, and I am revising that outline constantly. I'm always updating it and making connections and saying, no, this is better than this. But I feel to have the endings that I like and the stories the way that I like them, I need more control over the story than that. And so it's just my process is different.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to do maybe one more question, and then I'll do a reading, and then we'll come back to questions. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds good. Do you mind if I record this for a friend?
No.
Okay. So my question is related to the Cosmere. We've seen investiture manifest in different ways, like all across the systems, right? So I was wondering, when it comes to the powers of Dalinar, right? Is it possible for that power to open a perpendicularity anywhere be seen in, say, Skadriel or any other planet?
All right, let's see if
or
I
would
can
manifest it in a different way where you could potentially, combine all the realms, open the doors to all the realms.
Let me say this very carefully. Being recorded now. All right.
I could shut it.
No, you're fine. You're fine. All right. So, anytime where you gather the right amount of investiture in the right way, you are going to have kind of a version of a cosmere singularity, right? Which is where you are pulling the different realms together into kind of you're piercing between them with a large amount of investiture. And so what's happening with Dalinar is both the bug and the feature at the same time, but it is not necessarily the only way. And once the spiritual realm is being involved, time and space don't mean anything anymore on the spiritual realm. That's your answer.
Okay, thank you.
It wasn't a RAFO, but it was close. All right, so I'm going to do the reading, but I want those of you in line to remember your line space. And you can sit down so you don't have to stand up. And I will call the 5 of you up as soon as we finish with this thing, and you can just order back in line. And then if there's more time after that, we'll do other questions. So I always like to do a reading on these things, and I like to read something that you can't get somewhere else. I like to read whatever I'm working on right now. This is just, I think, makes readings more fun. And so I'm not going to read from Stormlight this time. I'm just going to read from the 3rd Legion story. This is the thing I finished the most recently. It's coming out this fall. And for those who haven't read Legion, let me give you a little primer on this. What happened is, I have a good friend named Dan Wells who likes to write psychological horror, really, really creepy psychological horror. And he likes to write about what is real and what is not real and things like this, and it's really creepy and scary, and he's a messed up guy. And we were sitting and chatting a number of years ago, and I said, Dan, I had this great idea for a story that you should write. It's always a bad sign when you say that, right? Because you'll see. I said, you should write this. I was thinking about, people who see hallucinations, but what if these hallucinations, if you were schizophrenic or something like unto it, and they helped you instead of distracting you, and they were like voices for your own subconscious brilliance, and you were like a one-person team of experts who all of you, you and your hallucinations would go solve crimes and things. And he's like, Brandon, that sounds way more like a Brandon Sanderson book than a Dan Wells book. It's not creepy at all. And I'm like, yeah, but it's really cool. He's like, yes, that sounds like you using psychology as a magic system. So I'm like, oh. And so I thought about this. This is why it's good to have good writer friends for quite a while. And what I came up with is very different from clinical schizophrenia. I make very clear this is its own weird thing. And it's about a guy who is a genius. He can learn anything in a very short amount of time. He gets on a plane with a book and reads a dictionary, studies the dictionary, can memorize the language, and by the time he lands, he can speak the language. But his brain works in such a way that packing all this information in, he wouldn't be able to access it without some sort of filtering method. And what happens is he creates a hallucination who is an interpreter. And so he doesn't speak the language. He has a hallucination who does. And she will then listen to what people are saying in another language and say, oh, it's this. Now repeat back this. And he will poorly sound out the words, but manage to do it. And so it's this kind of interesting thing where one person has all of these expertise, but you have to manage them and juggle them in a certain way. And I wrote 2 novellas about this guy. And I called them Legion, and then suddenly it was about a year or 2 years ago, suddenly there's a real big boost in the sales on Amazon. We're like, what's going on? And I went and looked at the reviews, and someone said, this doesn't relate at all to the TV show, but I found it really interesting. I'm like, oh, right. That's a very commonly used title. So it is not related in any way to the Marvel TV show. But I have written the last of the 3 of the novellas, and we are binding them into one collection this fall. So if you haven't been reading them, you'll just be able to get them all 3 together. Coming out, I think it's September-ish. It might be August, somewhere around there. And I'm just going to read you a short little thing from the beginning of this one. It's not too spoilerific. They are all kind of very standalone-ish. So, JC said, hands on hips as he regarded the building. Anyone else worried that this doctor's office is in a slum? It's not a slum, Ivy said, holding out her hand to help me from the back of the limo. Sure, JC said, and those aren't crack dealers on the corner over there. JC, those kids are like 6. He narrowed his eyes. Starting early, are they? Nefarious little entrepreneurs. Ivy rolled her eyes, but Tobias, a little unsteady on his feet as he was getting on in years, just laughed. A hearty, full-lunged laugh. He climbed out of the limo with my help, then slapped JC on the back. And JC grinned, showing he was at least a little aware of his buffoonery. He might not like admitting that he was a hallucination, but he was getting better at laughing at himself. Wait here, if you would, Wilson, I said to my driver. I should be just inside. The office is on the ground floor. JC was joking, but he never joked without some provocation. A part of me, deep in the back of my brain, acknowledged that this wasn't a normal location for a psychologist's office. Though the building before us was your ordinary 2-story generic suburb office structure, it was across the street from a pawn shop and next door to a mechanic shop. Not a slum, but not exactly prime real estate. Very well, Master Leeds. Wilson was a tall, distinguished man who doubled as my butler. He had his niece, a petite young woman in her 20s, shadowing him again. As comfortable as he looked in his traditional butling gear, she seemed awkward, wrapped in a coachman's coat and cap. She made me uncomfortable. I was used to Wilson seeing me at my most intimate, sitting in the back seat and talking to my most intimate as I sat in the back seat and talked to my hallucinations. It felt wrong to expose myself to someone else, someone from the outside. I mean, I went out among them, and I was used to people seeing my oddities, but this was different. We stepped into the building, which had a familiar, sterile sense to it. Not quite like a hospital, but frequently cleaned and scrubbed to give the off-white scent of one of them. The first door to my right was number 16, where we were supposed to meet the interviewer. JC glanced through the side window. No reception chamber, he said. Just one large room. I'm telling you, this is the sort of place where you step in, someone grabs you from behind. You black out, and then bam, 3 kidneys. 3? Ivy asked. Sure, JC replied. They need unwitting mules for their illegal organ trade. Assuming that was even physically possible, how unwitting are you going to be when you wake up with an incision in your abdomen? Wouldn't you immediately run to the doctor? His eyes narrowed. Well, of course, the doctor's in on it, Ivy. I looked to Tobias, who was still smiling. He nodded toward a painting on the wall of the hallway. Albert Brierstadt, he said, among the Sierra Nevada mountains. The original hangs in the Smithsonian, one of the more famous pieces from the Hudson River School of Artists. As always, the sound of his voice relaxed me. Tobias didn't need to speak on anything specific. His calming tone was enough to contrast JC's jovial but still deep-seated paranoia. I raised my fist and knocked on the door. Tobias continued, regarding the painting. I've always loved how the clouds part with light above a placid wilderness, shrouded in dark, a representation of the creation as viewed through the lens of the American frontier, the sky parting with light, a point at the center to which our eyes are drawn inevitably as we are accepted into heaven. Contrastingly, Ivy noted, the clouds could be closing and the landscape dimming as God withdraws and leaves men in shadow. I started, glancing at Ivy. She was usually the religious one, sticking up for all things holy and Christian-y. She just shrugged and looked away. The door opened, revealing a tall, older Asian woman with a squarish face and prominent smile lines. Ah, she said. Leeds. Excellent. She gestured for us to enter, and JC, of course, went first. He ducked under her arm, deftly avoiding touching the real person, like my aspects always did. He spun around, hand on his weapon, then nodded toward me. Remember that move I taught you, he noted, for when someone grabs you from behind. If she grabs his behind, Ivy noted, I think Steve will be preferring other kinds of moves. The interviewer had set out a group of chairs for us, and she stood by the door, a conspicuously long time for us all to enter, so she'd done her homework. She'd set out too many chairs, of course, and she waited too long. She couldn't see the aspects, but her efforts did help with the illusion, for which I was grateful. Ivy and Tobias settled themselves while JC inspected the room, a large set of windows up to our right, with the far left wall being almost entirely one large saltwater fish tank. The rest of the decor went with a riding den type of room, theme with a hardwood bookcase and deep carpeting. I stepped up to the window and nodded toward Wilson, who was standing out beside the car. He nodded back. 3 of you today, then? The interviewer asked. I turned around, frowning. I followed your eyes, she said, pointing to the chairs where Ivy and Tobias sat, then across the room to where JC had been standing, though he'd moved and was apparently searching the bookshelves for levers to open secret passages. Only 3, I said. Ivy, Tobias, JC, you have done your homework. I like to be prepared, the woman said, settling down. I'm Jenny, by the way, in case Lisa didn't say anything. She had, though it would be completely like Lisa to send me in blind. This woman was Jenny Zhang. I'd looked her up ahead of time. She hadn't practiced psychology in years. Instead, she'd been writing books. Psychological biographies, she called them. Just another pop science guru riding the line between self-help and entertainment. I wasn't certain what she expected to get out of me in a single session, certainly not enough for a book. She nodded toward the seats, but I remained beside the window. Suit yourself, Jenny said, getting out a notepad. She pointed at the chairs. JC, Tobias, Ivy. Id, ego, superego. Oh, great, Ivy said. One of those. Tell her we've been over this and it doesn't fit. We're not fans, I noted to Jenny, of that psychological profile. Ivy's the one complaining? Jenny asked, curious. She's a repository of your understanding of human nature. You've externalized people and your relationship with them into a single individual. She's supposedly very cynical. What does that say about you, I wonder? I shifted uncomfortably as JC walked over and took a seat by Ivy. Hey, he said, that's not bad. But you've also created an external sense of peace and relaxation, Jenny said, pointing her pencil toward one of the seats. She'd reversed them, but obviously she meant Tobias now. A reservoir you can draw upon. You say he's a historian, but how often is his knowledge of history important? Frequently, I said. That's not what I hear, Jenny said, writing down something, though what I couldn't say. She'd been doing all the talking. Wasn't this supposed to be an interview? From what I can tell, Jenny said, you need him for other reasons. You claim to have limited slots in your team of aspects. Imagining them all, keeping them all close is difficult, so you only bring a few with you at a time. You always have JC, your sense of paranoia and self-preservation, and that makes sense. But you also always make room for Tobias. Why do you always want him near? She knows too much, Ivy said, standing up. Something's wrong with this interview. Do we really need to panic if someone is eager to interview us? Someone who is eager to interview us has read the profiles and done a little theorizing, Tobias said. Wouldn't we be suspicious if she hadn't? I idled by the window, but finally JC nodded and sat down. He was satisfied. I stepped further into the room, but didn't sit. Instead, I walked up to the fish tank. It was extravagant, with variegated corals and beautiful lighting. So much work to create what amounted to a prison. Jenny was still writing. What did she find so fascinating? You've used a lot of your time already, I said, watching fish pick at the coral, eating at their own confines. Don't you have any questions? Everyone else wants to know how I tell reality from hallucination, or what it feels like to internalize knowledge. Perhaps you want to know how many aspects I'm up to right now. What happened to Ignacio? Jenny asked. I spun on her, and the 3 aspects went silent, Ivy raising her fingers to her lips. You mentioned him in interviews in the past, Jenny said, watching me with keen eyes. One of your most favored aspects, a chemist. And yet in a recent case you took, one with the bacteria that could eat motor oil, you didn't involve him at all. Curious. I can find several other admissions. We stared at her. Ignacio, him and Justin, they just weren't aspects of mine any longer. Tobias cleared his throat. Did you see they had Algernon Blackwood on the shelf? Original Arkham House edition, which those are my favorite. The feel of the paper, the scent, that is the scent of lore itself. You've frozen up, Jenny noted, so I touched a nerve. Can you lose aspects, Leeds? Why has nobody touched on this in interviews before? Original Arkham House editions are rare, though that depends on what you want to read. I once had a copy of Bradbury's Dark Carnival from them, though the cover... What happened? Jenny asked. Did they simply move out? The cover did not age well. Ivy, I whispered. Right, she said, standing up. All right, so she's poking at you and acting innocent. I don't buy it, Steve. She knows this would touch a nerve. Look how tightly she holds that pencil, hanging on your words. I'm sorry, Tobias said, dabbing at his brow with a handkerchief. I'm not very helpful right now, am I? She's goading us, JC said, standing up. He rested his hand on Ivy's shoulder, lightly, protectively, but also with a pleading air. What do we do? She wants you off balance, Ivy decided. She looked at me. She's trying to push you to an edge. You need to reassert control of the conversation. But how much does she know? Tobias asked. Surely she couldn't simply have guessed what happened to Ignacio. You don't speak of these things often. He cocked his head. Stan says she must be working for them. Not helping, Tobias, Ivy said, spinning on him. Quiet, I said to them. Quiet, all of you. They quieted. I locked eyes with Jenny, who sat calm, with a pencil poised to write my responses. Feigned nonchalance. I couldn't keep unraveling every time Ignacio or Justin's names came up. I had to control this. I was not crazy. I'm not comfortable talking about this topic, I said, finally walking over and taking the seat she provided for me. Why not? Different question, please. Have you lost any other than Ignacio? I can sit here all day, Jenny, I said, repeating the same words over and over. Is that how you want to waste your interview? Very well. Another question, then. She shuffled through her papers. You maintain throughout interviews that you are not insane, that, by your definition, insanity is merely the state at which a person's individual psychology infringes upon their ability to live their normal life. Exactly, I said, standing up again. Talk to the media, and they'll want to pretend that insanity is a magical state that someone can just catch. They miss the nuance, that human brain chemistry is incredibly complex, and certain traits that, in extreme, are deemed insane by society are present in many other people and contribute greatly to their success. So you deny that mental illness is indeed an illness? I didn't say that. I glimpsed at my aspects. Ivy, sitting primly with legs crossed. Tobias, who had stood to look out the window toward where he thought he could see Stan, the astronaut, up in his satellite. JC, lounging by the door, still worried this entire meeting was a setup. I'm just saying, I continued, that the definition of the word insanity is a moving target, and it depends greatly upon the person being discussed. If they think differently than you do, but those thought patterns don't interrupt their life, then why try to fix them? And your aspects don't interrupt your life? Depends on how annoying JC is being at the moment, I said. Hey, JC said, I don't deserve that. All three of us looked at him. Today, he added, I've been being good. Ivy cocked an eyebrow. On the way here, you said, and I quote, the police shouldn't be so racist to them towelheads, because it isn't their fault that they're from China or wherever. See, I was being good. He shuffled. Uriad is speaking out, Jenny noted, looking from me to JC. She couldn't see him, but again, she was good at following my attention. He is not my id, I said. Don't try to pretend that he somehow articulates my secret desires. I'm not sure if he could articulate anything, Ivy added, because doing so would require more than grunts. JC rolled his eyes. I turned from them, walking across the room to stare at the large fish tank that made up most of the back wall. I always wondered, what did the fish know of their cage? Could they even comprehend what had happened to them, that their entire world was artificial? So, Jenny said, what has changed for you, Leeds? Let's say since your last interview of this nature. It seemed another attempt at getting an answer about Ignacio and Justin, aspects I'd lost. I didn't bite. Nothing has changed, I said instead, watching a little black and red fish dart between some fake yellow coral. You don't think you're getting worse? No, I am, what I've always been. Always? Papers shuffled behind me. Because these early reports are very different from what you are now. They speak of a frightened boy who claimed he was surrounded by demons, each whispering to him instructions. It had been a long time since I'd had to deal with things like that. Find a purpose, Sandra had taught me. Do something with the voices. Don't just sit around and listen to them. Hey, JC interrupted before I could speak. I'm going to go grab some jerky or something at that gas station. Anyone want anything? Wait, I said, spinning away from the fish tank. I might need you. What? JC said, hand on the doorknob. Need me to be the butt of some more jokes? I'm sure you'll live. He stepped out the door, then pulled it closed. I stood, speechless. He'd left. Usually when JC disobeyed, it was because I tried to leave him behind, because I didn't want him practicing with it, or because I didn't want him practicing with his guns. He disobeyed to protect me, at least as he saw it. He didn't just walk away. Ivy ran to the door and peeked after him. She looked back at me and shrugged helplessly. Want me to go after him? No, I whispered. So, Jenny said, We were talking about you not getting worse? Aye. That's an Achilles tang, Tobias said, stepping up to me and nodding toward the little red and black fish. It looks black, but it's actually dark brown, sometimes even a dark purple. A beautiful but difficult fish to keep. That spot on the tail is the origin of its name. The red spot, as if a bleeding spot on the ankle, inspired the moniker, which is officially Archanathris archelius. I don't think I can say that right. I took a deep breath. JC was just being JC. We were talking too much about aspects, and he hated being reminded that he wasn't real. That's why he'd left nothing more. JC's always been this way, I said to Jen. But I've had some rough patches lately, perhaps. I need something to focus my aspects and my mind. A case? Jenny asked, pulling a few sheets out from behind her notepad. She set them on the coffee table in front of her. Ah, Ivy said, still standing by the door. She relaxed visibly. That's her angle, Steve. This is all preamble. She wants to hire you. She was putting you off balance, Tobias said with a nod. Perhaps to put herself in a better bargaining position. This was familiar ground. I relaxed, settling down in the seat across from Jenny. All this to offer me a case, I said, shuffling through the papers. You people, you realize you could just ask. You have a tendency to return letters unopened, Leeds, the reporter said, but she did have the decency to blush. What is this? I said, skimming. A machine that can use big data to predict a person's exact wants, updated minute by minute, incorporating brain chemistry with historic decisions, removing the need for most choices. That's kind of interesting, Ivy said, reading over my shoulder. I guess it will depend on the price and what she wants you to do. What do you need from me? I asked Jen. She started talking, explaining the mission, but my pocket buzzed. I absently glanced at the phone, expecting a text from JC, a picture of himself at the gas station or some such nonsense. Whatever my psyche decided I needed to see in the way of a fake text from a fake bodyguard, now that the crisis was ending. But the text wasn't from JC. It was from Sandra, the woman who originally had taught me to use my aspects, the woman who brought me sanity, the woman who had vanished soon after. The text read simply, help. And we will stop there. So we're going to get those 5 people back up in line, and we will start going to them. So yeah, I have a lot of fun with these books. They're a little different from my norm, but that's kind of how I operate. I need something different after I finish a book, and often after I finish an epic fantasy, I need something that just feels different. And that's where the Legion story started, and this was kind of my break right after I finished Oathbringer. I did one little other thing in between, but I kind of jumped into this to reset my own brain, so to speak. All right, go ahead.
Okay. First I wanted to thank you for your autistic characters, and especially Steris. I'm on the spectrum, and that means a lot to me. I loved the romance between Wax and Steris as it evolved. And then I have some questions. A lot of questions. But the one that I would really like a full answer on is, are the Pershendi living computers, and are Spren variables in a computer system?
Excellent question. The answer is, I would say no, I wouldn't consider this, but I have considered this idea, and there is a place in the Cosmere where people are using Spren, not Spren, but something similar on another planet, as a little bit of for a little bit of computation, which I want to be able to write that story someday. But it's a very fun thing that I dug down a rabbit hole in one time. So you might see this somewhere in the Cosmere, but you're not gonna. It's not actually Roshar. I wouldn't call them that. And I appreciate the comment on Steris. I kind of feel that when I did Elantris, I was really interested in this, and I maybe didn't. I kind of approached things in like a pop culture sort of way, without really understanding it. And then I came to know some people with autism, and I'm like, I need to do this better. I need to do this realistically and kind of help with the presentation rather than contributing to one narrow definition that is the pop culture definition. So I'm glad that has worked for you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I got more.
Okay, let's do one more.
One more? Okay,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Let me pick. Those are his questions. How did you come up with like the creatures on Roshar, or like not really Galadriel, it's kind of
Yeah.
dead.
No,
But
that's
where do you
yeah.
start in your world building for that kind of thing?
So where I started in Roshar was the High Storm. So I knew I had the High Storm, and I knew I was going to want to build out from that, and I would want an ecology that incorporated the magic. Those were kind of the two things I was looking for. I wanted everything to deal with the storms in some way and be affected by it, and I wanted Stormlight and Spren to be integrated into the way that the world building happened. Because this was my big world building epic, and so I kind of started along those two lines, and that's where Gem Hearts came from. That is where the Parshendi grew naturally out of that, and a lot of the creatures and things I looked toward tidal pools because I figured this was a kind of a similar sort of thing, an environment that has to deal with a really drastic change in environment, a biome that deals with this repeatedly every day. And so that was part of my inspiration.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hello, Brandon.
Hey.
So I just came off of the VR experience.
Yeah.
And it was really exciting. I'm really glad to have been a part of that. How much of that were you actually part of?
So what happened is they came to me a couple years ago and brainstormed. We just brainstormed an experience. They had the pitch of being in the chasms, and I was cool with that. I thought that was a good idea. We brainstormed. They picked my brain about what things look like. They wrote it all down. They showed me some concept art, and they did show me the script when they had it. And so I was involved, but it wasn't like it was. I was completely overseeing it, and that's how I kind of prefer to do things. I prefer with the media interpretations that people listen to me and listen, to pitfalls and things like that they might be making. But at the end of the day, I want them to be free to make the piece of art they want to make. So, for instance, the Parshendi don't look 100% like I imagine them, right? And that, but the chasms look very close to how I imagine them, and so. But I kind of like that. I like how different artists interpret different ideas in my work and things like that. So it's kind of exciting to me. So that's where I would go on that.
Very cool. Yeah, if you haven't checked it out.
Yeah, you guys should go check it out. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Hi, how are you?
Hello, I just have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Are you friends with any other authors?
Yeah, we do tend to move in the same circles, and so we end up at cons together and things like that. I know a lot of them. I'm not sure, how many I would count, friends, but there's a lot. I have a lot of friends. Pat's here this year, right? Pat and I broke in at the same time, Pat Rothfuss, and we got to be pretty good friends, kind of fighting in the trenches as new authors at the same time. I, of course, know the people on my podcast very well. I know a lot of authors from my area and things like that, but it's really useful to be able to sit down with other authors. Like last time Jim Butcher was at Salt Lake Comic Con, I think he's here also. We had dinner, we just were able to talk about, hey, what do you do in this situation? What do you do in this situation? How does this contract look for you? How do you approach this with your characters? And it's really useful to talk to other authors who are kind of in the same point in their career as you are, and that goes for aspiring authors too. Surrounding yourself with people who are working in the same sort of direction you are can be just really helpful. Thank you for the question.
All right, so I got two questions.
All right.
First one was, what was your inspiration for Steelheart's weakness?
Uh-huh.
And then the second one is, what was your inspiration for Kaladin? What made you sort of want to make him?
So without spoiling Steelheart, the inspiration for the weakness was a direct outgrowth of who I saw him as a character before he gained powers. Kind of the bully sort of person who, given a little bit of power, exercises all kinds of, terrible, he's just really mean to people with a really small amount of power. That character was really fascinating to me. The person who really doesn't have any authority, but still, what little bit you give them, they misuse. And I grew out of that idea, and I want to try to connect It's a slight spoiler for the series, but I wanted the weaknesses to connect to the personalities of the characters in interesting ways. So it was a natural outgrowth there. Kaladin's origin was in me reading about the interesting lives of surgeons in pre-industrial eras. Surgeons who were at times treated like no different than a butcher, and at the other times, kind of straddled this line between superstition and science in a really interesting way. And I wanted to write a surgeon who kind of straddled that line, where the superstition was against them, but in some ways the science that they knew also worked against them because people didn't trust it. That's a really fascinating character, and he started more as his dad. And then as I worked the books, he became Kaladin, the son of a surgeon, instead of the surgeon himself.
Thank you very much.
First off, thank you for answering so many technical questions about your world.
My pleasure. Yeah. Don't take anything I say too strongly, because particularly, I'm usually pretty good at these interviews, but I remember, I flew to London the same day, had a signing, sat down to do a signing, and got hit with detailed Cosmer questions right at the beginning. And it's like, it's like you're trying to answer complex math questions while also writing your name over and over again with jet lag. And I know I got some of them. I'm like, why did I say that? So don't take anything that the goofball on the stage says too much. But I do try. I try to keep it all. Yeah.
So this is a why question. So
Okay.
answer however you feel like on this one.
All right.
So shards.
Yes.
Yeah. Shards, we started with fairly obvious ones, just things magic-wise. I'm trying to keep this spoiler-free, so
Yep.
ruin, preservations kind of thing. Then we get the weird ones. So why do we have shards that can only exist in the mind of a sentient creature?
Okay. What I'm afraid. Which ones do you think? Honor. Okay.
Like the concept of honor can only be done when it's carried out essentially by a sentient creature.
Right. So when I split Adenalcium, I said I'm going to take aspects of Adenalcium's nature, right? And this involves personality to me. So the shattering of Adenalcium was primal forces attached to certain aspects of personality. And so I view every one of them this way. And when I wrote Mistborn, we had ruin and preservation. There are the primal forces of entropy and whatever you call the opposite, staying the same, ism-ni. Right? You've got these two contrasts between things changing and things not changing. And then humans do have a part. There's personality. Ruin is a charged term for something that actually is the way that life exists. And preservation is a charged term for stasis, right? For staying the same. And those are the personality aspects and the way that they're viewed by people and by the entity that was Adenalcium. And so I view this for all of them. Honor is this sense of being bound by rules. Even when those rules you wouldn't have to be bound by. And there's this sense of that is noble, right? That's the honor aspect to it. But there's also something not honorable about honor if taken from the other direction. And so a lot of them do kind of have this both cultural component, I would say, that is trying to represent something that is also natural. And not all of them are going to have a 100% balance between those two things, I would say, because there's only so many fundamental laws of the universe that I can ascribe personalities to in that way. So I find honor very interesting, but I find autonomy a very interesting one for the exact same reason, right? What does autonomy mean? We attach a lot to it, but what is the actual, if you get rid of all the charged terms, what does it mean? And this is where you end up with things like Odium claiming I am all emotion, but then there's a charged term for it that is associated with this shard. And I'm not going to tell you whether he's right or not, but he has an argument.
Thank you.
Hello. So many questions and so many more raised by that.
All right, let's keep it to two.
I'll keep it to two. Okay, so first of all, where are the rest of Roshar's named gems?
Where are they?
Yes, we have the Hope Diamond.
Right.
We've got dozens
A
of
lot
them.
of them are in the gem warehouse. What did I end up calling that? This is where you get me on the spot. I called it something cool.
You did. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a lot of them around, and there are places like that. One of the tricks, and I actually kind of was aware of this, particularly in book 3. I'm like, I maybe should have named some of these things earlier. One of the tricks with a book like Way of Kings is there are already so many names and terms that oftentimes I find myself finding ways to not include a new name or term because the overwhelming nature of the learning curve is so big. And I will admit, writing book 3, I'm like, I should have named some of these earlier. This is what they would do, right? But it's kind of this Occam's razor, well, that's the wrong term, but it's this idea of let's try to keep it as simple as possible for the fact that it's really complex, and that's why I naturally just didn't do it. I would say in World, a lot of them are named. But you've also got to remember that gems are not as eternal on Roshar as they are. They're a little more ephemeral. You are often using them for something, and they are wearing out, so to speak. And so the idea that a diamond is forever is more of an Earth concept than a Roshar concept.
Right. And you mentioned Adonalsium as a being,
yes,
and that they were split.
Mm-hmm.
Where one supposedly supreme being exists, are there others?
That's a Raffo. I'm sorry, but yeah, we're gonna Raffo that for now.
Okay.
Thank
you very much, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning.
Hey.
Hey, this is a bit of a technical question, but if somehow Sazed were to die and another shard picked up Harmony, what would happen to their intent?
It would be influenced by them over time, but they would be influenced more by it.
Okay. Right. And this one's a bit of a stretch, but sorry.
What's that?
Sorry, I completely forgot.
That's all right. That's all right.
What was it?
Do you want to maybe step behind the next person? And okay. Yeah. Let's go ahead.
Hi.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're a very prolific writer, but you're also a really thoughtful guy about the mechanics of writing.
Right.
Do you ever find that you're producing content so quickly that your mind comes up with a better idea after percolating for a while and the book is already published? And if that does ever happen, how do you handle it?
So this is dangerous, right? And I think every author wants to go back and tweak things. And there's a fine line between pulling a Tolkien, where you go back to The Hobbit and you revise the Ring conversation so it matches Lord of the Rings, which has now become a classic conversation. We're all glad he did that, right? It ties The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings together better. It was a good revision. There's a fine line between that and Lucasing your work, right? Where instead of taking something and tweaking something to make it better, you tweak it to just make it different. Right? And so I think there is a fine line there. There's a quote that's often ascribed to Da Vinci, which a lot of people say isn't his, but it's the idea that he said, art is never finished, it's only abandoned. And you really have to take that perspective as an artist. You have to eventually just let things go. Not to sing an Elsa song, but you just gotta be willing to say I'm done, and you are always going to have better ideas later on, or your ways you could tweak it. More, it's not that you have better ideas. What happens is you change as an artist, and your goals and change over time, and the way you would approach something changes over time. And so while I've played in this realm, I've kind of settled on that I should just avoid this most of the time. You could always tweak it to be better. And that goes, you gotta release something at some time. I do find it very useful to finish something, write something else, and then come back to the thing I finished, because that gives me the right amount of balance between giving it some time to rest so that I can approach it with fresh eyes, and also being regular with the releases. I haven't ever felt like I'm going too fast. I have had things that don't turn out well, but those I just don't release, right? That happened with Apocalypse Guard last year, where I wrote the book, I gave it some time, I came back and looked at it, it didn't work. It was broken, it was not good. And I'm like, well, I just gotta set this aside and think about it. It's weird, writing has a little bit more performance art to it than as a non-writer you might think, meaning who you are in the moment when you're creating this thing, and the connections you make while you're making it are deeply influential toward how the piece of art turns out. And it's like you're freezing a moment in time for that author. Rather than trying to create the perfect work, you're creating a reflection of who they are when they made it. And you have to kind of be okay with that as a writer.
Okay, thanks.
I think we're at about 5 minutes. Yep.
I remembered.
Oh, good.
Was Honor just talking about the people on Roshar when he told Dalinar to unite them?
Rapho. Read and find out.
I have one other question. Do you see yourself working with Ted Decker or Frank Peretti or either Ted Decker or Frank Peretti in the future?
I don't rule out working with anyone. Most of the time, there are just too many people that you would want to work with, then you won't have time to work with everybody, but I don't rule any of that out.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't think of any of these like really deep or technical.
That's all right. Some of them break my brain, right? So I tend to be pretty frank. People ask me questions, and I'll be like, I have never considered that. I'm going to give you an answer right now, but I don't know if it will stay true. So.
All right. Well, my first question is, why do you have to make so many of your terms and names in your book so confusing? I'm going to be using Mistborn as an example. Farukami.
Yes.
Metallurgy.
I think they're cool. Part of the answer is I look for the way languages are built, and I try to do things in the way that it's going to feel natural, but also foreign, and that is really tough. Like, it's going to feel alien. It comes from a different world, but it's natural to do and remember. And it's also based on the world. If you think Mistborn is hard, read Elantris. All those names are based on some linguistics that I realized as I wrote the book. This one is even tougher. And so sometimes I'm looking for things that are more familiar and less strange. Sometimes I'm looking for things that are more strange. At the end of the day, it's just whatever I think sounds cool.
And my second question, this is also a pretty simple one. Do you ever take inspiration for some of your characters from people you know, like in your life?
Yes and no. Meaning, generally, I don't base characters exactly on people I know. There are a few exceptions. Scar from Bridge 4 is Scar, my friend Ethan Scarstedt, who's in my writing group. He's in the military, and he's the only person I knew who actually would do a good job in that situation. I put him in. But most of the time, what I'm doing is I'm taking some interesting aspect about a character. When I was writing Elantris, I knew a woman who was 6'1", and she complained about her height a lot, and I'd never heard that. I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. I never considered that being 6'1" in our society as a woman would have all these extra associated problems. And I took that and I used it in a character and then had her read it and say, does this feel right? But it's not like that character represents Annie. That means that one aspect of Annie sent me into an interesting character conflict or interesting trait a character could have that I found fascinating. That happens a lot.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Hi.
I absolutely love your work, and as a metallurgist PhD, I would like to thank you for Mistborn specifically. I actually quite like the term ferrochem. I thought it was pretty cool. Anyway, I wanted to ask you a question about your worlds in general. I've read Mistborn and Elantris, and now reading The Way of Kings, and you seem to always associate such important parts of your magic system, or your personality system, or your deity system with the land, with the geography of wherever they live. Do you have a secret geography degree, or
No.
what kind of
I've got
drives
some.
that?
So the reason I do this is kind of comes down to a fundamental philosophy I have about epic fantasy. And epic fantasy is the genre of discovery and immersion. Grandpa Tolkien did this by taking a map and putting it in the book, and it wasn't just a map; it was the map they had. Right? So the map becomes an artifact of the world, and I love that. I love the idea that you can have a map that's wrong, right? That it's not an exact map. I love that you can have a scientific table in the back of the book that represents their understanding and human beings' attempt to organize the world, but is actually flawed. because it just represents their attempt at organizing things. And I love these ideas. I love the idea of the land and the artifact and the story all being one. And I really, one of the books that I love, even though the maps aren't the thing, is Dune, right? Dune is about how your environment shapes your culture and how your culture in turn interprets your environment. And I love how that works. I think it really influences how great epic fantasy creates its sense of immersion. I love how Watchmen did this with including ephemera in its books. By saying in creating a form where one issue does this certain thing to enhance the feel of the issue. I love when the form and the shape of the book does the same thing. So this is all kind of my nerdy writer loving the shape of things ism that I have, whatever that is. Oh boy. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
That was really awkward. Sorry. You'd think I could come up with a word for that.
You will. Ending with a very easy question, nothing profound. I've loved all your books, read 1, 2, and 3 of Stormlight all in a row. Shallan is my favorite character of the whole thing, and I just wanted to ask, what's the consensus? Who's the fan's favorite character from your perspective? Everybody that says it to you.
So I would say that Kaladin tends to be the fan favorite viewpoint character in that he is the least controversial, meaning most people just like Kaladin even when they're annoyed with him, right? It's just like, I get Kaladin. Shallan's the most divisive. The people who like Shallan's scenes love Shallan's scenes. The people who don't like Shallan's scenes, she is their least favorite character, right? And that's a sign that I'm doing a character right. I really I ran into this into any book where you have a wide cast, you're going to have this sort of thing. But yeah, I would say if you're just going to ask who's your favorite character, it's probably the Lopen. Everybody should say that, but if it's not the Lopen, then it's probably usually Kaladin. So. All right, thank you guys very much.